Bold architecture, bustling civic spaces, and beautiful historic buildings all feature in today's build. But you're going to see much more than me just plonking some buildings down. The entire outlook of the city's fortunes will change during today's episode. As you'd expect from this channel, there'll be plenty of beautiful spaces and interesting pockets of detail, but the most unexpected aspect of the video will actually centre around the death rate, and that's been a real concern lately, but more on that later. If you've missed last week's episode, I strongly recommend that you check it out at some point. The infrastructure work, the ground level choices, and just the amount of life and movement in that corner of the city is a joy to watch. It's one of my favourite builds, and it's well worth checking out. Today though, I'm going to very much continue in that same vein, and expand on what we started last week. Lots of landmarks, lots of walkable and bikeable networks, and frankly, there's lots to do. So in this build, there's going to be a number of buildings that are really going to act as a cornerstone for individual points of interest. I've had my eye on McWelshman's Church, and I would said in previous episodes that I wanted to try and slot that in a more modern area of the city, and that's exactly what we're going to do today. I'm not necessarily adverse to using it again when we get onto the more historic parts of the city, but for now, I definitely want to have it up against something modern. I also wanted to give you guys just a quick peek of the death rate there. As you've seen, that's over 4,000. The birth rate currently is about 400, so it's about 10x the birth rate. Definitely a concern, and that just keeps rising. The main thing I want to make sure is that we don't end up going the same way as Cape Lomond. That would be an absolute disaster. Now, as part of the health check that we did in the previous episode, I noticed that I didn't actually have any prison coverage. Not too sure exactly what effect that was going to have in the city, but the actual crime success rate was actually super high. It was up at like 60%, and that just can't be a good thing, can it? So I thought I'll just jump over to my little hidden corner where I have certain city services running, and we'll plonk down a prison. Now, although that's a bit of a forgotten corner, it's going to give me the opportunity to relocate things later on, and then we can really just have an entire build around these particular city facilities. I want to give a big thank you to Maestro. He is the modder who made the Dutch GVB set. That's the Amsterdam themed buses, trams and metro. He saw a little while back that the trams were just a little bit too big for my network, and what he's done is he's actually updated mod and he's added an additional model in there. So this mod now comes with the option to choose between a 5-car or a 4-car tram. I'm going to rejig some of the networks, but for some of the tighter ones where I'm really pushed for space, that's really going to help. So now that we've got that bit of maintenance out of the way, we can crack on and really start getting some of the first of the buildings down for today's build. I wanted to choose a prominent spot for our main ferry depot for the city. For me, having it where we have the densest development makes sense, and I think that is pretty much the spot. Of course, we'll get a little bit of jank tidied up here, but surface work will do the trick. It's not perfect, but I think that will suffice. I don't have much in the way of buses running really much in the city at all. I mainly use them for external services, but I certainly need to revisit that and essentially get a proper network set up. And talking about networks, I am going to have multiple stops along this route, and I think we'd like to try and get the as a circular route on the go at some point, and then obviously heading off towards the mainland and then the individual islands as well. So looking forward to that, but at least we can see Sims are coming, it is connected, and hopefully we get a bit of usage on that as well. It'd be nice to see it. Now, along this highway that comes directly into the city, I've made a bit of a feature having taller buildings looking over it, and I'm very much using the back of the buildings. I don't really want additional road networks running alongside it, and I think that's going to work really well. It should form quite a dramatic entrance to the city as people drive in, and I think eventually once we kind of build the city out a little bit more, I'm looking forward to getting those first person views on the cars. Now, initially what I thought about doing was having an old building there, like an old historic building, maybe some type of like customs building, something like that you would find in an old port. But in the end, what I decided to go was actually go much more modern instead. So I decided to use another of McWelshman's beautifully detailed assets. This is the Senedd Cymru, the Welsh Assembly building that you'll find in Cardiff. I'm going to repurpose it today, and I'm going to use it as a bit of an extension for our transit hub here. Now, as usual, I want plenty of bikes running, so we'll give them a little bit of parking here, and we'll continue to add them as we go along. But as you can see, we've got plenty of life down here as well, which is really nice to see. One important thing I did also notice part of the health check, so that was actually a really good idea by whoever suggested that. Thank you very much. I've lost the comment, or I'll put you up on the screen, but it did highlight that actually the road maintenance was lacking. We didn't actually have any road maintenance facilities at all in the city, so I think having it over here beside our tram depots and our bus depots and our little bit of industry and all that kind of stuff, does make sense. I'm not going to necessarily detail up this area, but I'll get things running, and that will give us a wee bit of detail and opportunity for a later time. I can't necessarily see this area being too busy, but we have the roads down here, we have the lanes, so we may as well optimise it, and we'll just put in the asymmetric stuff while we're at it. This spot was basically made for this church. Absolutely smashing. I really wanted a kind of prominent position, and I think having this as a main road coming into this part of the city does make sense, and I'm going to be able to really create a really lovely area on this later on. Now, given that the asset itself bleeds into the road networks, I did need to remove some of the detailing that comes with it, and we will rejig that and we'll recreate it a little bit later on. As you maybe noticed there, I did decide to put our customs house back in. That's basically just a row of police stations, from the US pack. And I also wanted to extend that custom asset building that we really just extended out with some static ploppables, and I'm going to really repeat the process on the other side. But I think putting them together, get that car parking hidden. I don't want that necessarily in this part of the city, but we have got a real nice sort of custom landmark building essentially that we have out here, and it's going to give us a really cool effect later on as we build the area out and add more buildings. Jumping back over to the water side here, we have these three buildings that look like they've just been plonked down without too much care or attention, and that is exactly the case. They have been there really just as a bit of a reminder that I do want to put them in the build, but this is not going to be the location. So let's get them pushed off to the side and try and decide on some definitive orientation for these buildings. This one, I would definitely like to push it up against that big mega block that we've just made. I think from a street level point of view, that is looking pretty nice. Along the water side, I'm going to be using some of Smiley's buildings again. I didn't actually notice there was corner ones on the previous episode, so happy days, they are now in. And I'm going to repeat what we've done on the other side of the city centre here, and I'm going to use that Chinese one to kind of bookend it. And I think that maybe gives the impression that we've got the same developer and they've just developed in a different part of the city, but with similar, not identical, but similar blocks. Around the back of these buildings, I really kind of struggled to envisage what type of building would be there, so I decided to go for a park, and I'm going to actually slot quite a few of them into this build as well. I think it's quite important to keep the people happy. Another thing that's going to keep the people happy is this beautiful landmark building. This is by Heartfelt, it's a custom asset, and it's a lovely one too. Chinese asset, this one, it, according to Google Translate, is the Exit Entry Administration Bureau, so they deal with travel, passports, that kind of stuff. For me though, in this build, it's going to represent really another museum, bold modern architecture, and again, it's one that I want to give a prominent position, and I think up against the water is the right spot for it. Now, as you can see on this junction, I had a little bit of a problem trying to build the pedestrian parks and getting them all connected. It was causing a bit of jank here, and it really wasn't going to fit the bill. So in the end, I ended up to just leave it for just now. It was starting to bug me, but what I did want to do was to make sure that this little side road was fully functional, and I wanted people to come in, and without making a kind of weird sort of almost a U-turn, I wanted to give them a little bit of an exit point there. The detailing that was kind of pre-put back in with the game, it really wasn't working, so I decided to delete some of the lines, and then where I've got the surface there, I just wanted to give it a little bit more of a natural blend to the existing road networks. I think that's looking okay, but as you can see, the junction itself is still really large, so for me that's still going to need a little bit of work. So time to just check in with the workplaces and unemployment. The unemployment number we can see is down to 36%. I didn't show it at the beginning of the episode, but we were running at 43%. So we've taken quite a big chunk off of that already, which is really nice to see. It's heading in the right place, and you might be surprised by the final number we get come the end of the episode. Now, I decided just to rebuild this particular little junction, although it might not look necessarily too much different. The actual junction itself, the main node, is significantly smaller, and what I'm going to need to do is just remove some of the crossing points, keep things moving, and just make sure that people don't actually park on the blooming thing either. That's super annoying. But by reducing the size of the junction, especially here on the right hand side as they're coming into the area, that should help keep things a little bit more fluid in terms of traffic flow, and we'll just keep an eye on it. We'll make sure that there's no other problems. Keeping things bike and pedestrian friendly, we want to make sure that there are options. We do have several tunnels elsewhere on the railway network, letting people come in and out of individual parts of the city, and this will be no different. This is just a temporary one for the time being, but at least we have it connected. Let's just zoom in and get a feel for how things are shaping up. I think in terms of the orientation on that and the overall positioning in the surrounding buildings, it's coming together quite nicely. We do have plenty of work to be done still yet, but I think it's off to a pretty good start. So back to the riverside again, and again I am just going to use Smiley's blocks here. I do love these things. I think they fit perfectly for our, really what's a Rotterdam inspired build, I think, today and the previous episode. Don't know if I'm too mad on the blue, so I think I will get them recolored just a little bit. But really nice modern buildings here. I think that would be a pretty nice place to live. And we don't have too much going in terms of traffic there on the front or at the back, so I think from a noise point of view that might not be too disturbing either. Now on this side, this frontage, we are not going to have a road with vehicle traffic, so I am just going to keep the bike lanes there. I'm going to create something myself here. So because we don't need access, we use a static ploppable on this one, and I think that's a real nice complementary addition to the build. So let's just quickly get that recoloring done. It's quite a subtle little change, but I think it is the correct one. Okay, so time to step back and see how things are progressing. So we've got plenty of landmark buildings, lots of employment with mixed-use buildings, and of course the signatures, of course, as well do make quite a big impact on that number as well. Along the waterfront, I did want to provide a little bit of contrast to some of these larger buildings are quite tall, so we'll use some of the smaller support buildings like the underground parking and the bike parking when it makes sense. Now this little building was not in place, so what I needed to do was just get rid of some of the key walls, make sure it's connected to the actual road itself, then obviously all the city services will connect automatically from it. Now, although this asset might look a bit out of place, what we need to do is just get rid of that branding and get the colour changed as well. And it's going to fit in and blend in perfectly. Now at the beginning of the episode, you might or might not have noticed me actually removing some decals. I did use the line tool to put the decals down and just really fill the gap between the keyhole road and the bike lane, but I didn't notice that it put down layers of the blooming thing, so I think I do want to make sure that from a performance point of view I'm not putting down any decals that aren't necessary, so we get rid of all of them and I've just put down just a single file line that should be much easier on performance rather than stacking tons of decals one on top of the other. Now they might be hidden and might not make any difference performance wise, I don't know, but better safe than sorry with these things. I do want to try and run this city for just as long as I can. Now in this section of the city, I wanted to really do something different. I wanted some large footprint buildings, but not necessarily tall buildings. I'm going to very much bring the scale of the buildings down. I prefer to do that a little bit more gently, but at the same time I also want to have some interesting and different uses to the actual buildings themselves in that part of the city, and it's going to be very much a bit of a transition zone as we continue to expand. So I'm just going to have a quick spin about and just make sure that I'm happy with the building choice and the colours and whatnot in the build today. I think I'm pretty happy with all of that so far. I think we're ready for a little bit of detailing and concentrating on the surfaces, but I wanted to also check in on this death rate as well, and as you can see it's up to over 5,000 now. Really big concern. Again, we'll keep an eye on things, we'll see how it progresses. Oh, but we do have unemployment down at 29%, so we've got that going for us. Okay, now it's time to make this place look like a bit of a city. Onto the detailing, gonna focus really on the surface work and all these little gaps in between the buildings. Obviously, as I said plenty of times before, I don't really want any vanilla grass showing anywhere in this city. Certainly not in the city centre at least anyway, but obviously as we build elsewhere we might have a couple of patches here and there, but as a general rule I want it out. Now this section is a little bit different. I'm actually reserving this for some future development later on. I'm not going to share what I have in mind. You might just see it come into play a little bit later on in the series, but for now we're going to have a little patch of grass that's just going to sit there and just look pretty for the time being. Crypto Gamers knit lanes, these edges come in so useful, and of course if you've got a little bit of a uneven section or a bit of a wonky line, these things cover up quite nicely. I don't use them everywhere, but sometimes when we have that edge between two certain surfaces and it just doesn't look right, then it tends to work pretty nicely. Now if you're Welsh and you're watching this, please don't hate me, but I did have to cover the Welsh Assembly sign. It didn't make sense to have that obviously in a Dutch themed build. Now, kind of similar to that big node that we saw and we worked on earlier on, I didn't actually notice this one until somebody pointed it out in Discord. The actual junction itself was massive. We had that line which was way back down, almost closer to the other junction rather than the junction in which it's serving. So a little bit of movement here. I just had to manipulate the mode and push it up towards where that higher junction is, and I think that definitely looks a little bit better. I must admit, I didn't even notice it in the first time round. Now, if this detailing has a theme, the theme is trying to get things functional, and to do that I'm going to really just cram in as many functional parks as I possibly can. The gaps that we have in between the buildings are relatively small, so we need to kind of pick carefully whether that's one of the kind of medium-sized ones like this, or whether we use multiple small ones. And of course, the sections that are left undecorated, we're just going to fill those gaps with a couple of choice surfaces, assets, and vegetation. And I think if we can use the actual props that are within the building itself, or within the park rather itself, we can just use the picker and we can expand that and kind of make it feel like it's a natural fit. Now, one thing that isn't a natural fit is this park, so we're gonna have to do quite a bit of work on this one. Sully's grass decals coming to the fore again, love these things, and they instantly just give you some really obvious places to get decorating. Dilmo's added a wildflower pack on PDX mods. Go and check it out. This is the same creator that's given us the long grass and the beautiful trees, and it does add quite a lovely splash of colour here on the vegetation. So I'm going to use that quite a bit actually as the build continues to grow. You're going to notice me using net lanes here and getting a pretty poor result, so don't worry too much about that. As long as we've got a perfect circle, I should be able to use the move it functionality and just shift these into place, so just a little bit of a nudge is all that's required. Now, an extra bit of life and an extra bit of functionality and movement, we're going to achieve that by adding in some invisible paths. Lovely stuff. You'll see that they're going to be used pretty much straight away, to be honest. And again, back onto Crypto Gamer's net lanes, and we are just going to add a little splash of colour on the actual main road themselves. But quite satisfying, obviously. We're not finished just yet. We still want to add a bit more prop work, and it is worth having a look at that death rate again, isn't it? Still over 5,000. These urban benches are very smart, aren't they? Lovely contemporary assets here. I think that's part of Sully's brickwork pack, I believe. I could be wrong. Somebody will correct me in the comments, I've got no doubt about it. Now, as an alternative here, I wanted a little small scale one, and again, I wanted to get some city bonuses in here as well. So I'm just going to use tiny parks, and I'm going to just cram in as many as I can. Now, obviously, the orientation of all of the planters here doesn't quite make sense, so the plan here is to basically remove them, remove the surfaces, and then just rebuild them. But we're going to keep all of the individual seats and all that kind of stuff in place. So although we've got the surface replaced and we've got some of the prop work replaced, you will notice that some of the actual assets tend to disappear, and it's not like the whole thing disappears either. It just seems to be some of them, which is really irritating, to be perfectly honest. So all I need to do to get them back really is just select them and move it, give them a little jiggle, and hopefully they'll stay in place for a little bit longer. Or at least I can get some cinematic shots for the end of the video, right? But yeah, it's super annoying. If anybody has a solution for that, I'd like to hear it. I think it's probably similar to the lines on car parks. You know, when they disappear, you've got to kind of raise the height or give them a sugar and move it. But I think overall we've got a really nice area here, and especially as the subway comes out, you see that getting really busy. Swinging back over to our waterfront and our big transit area there, I'm not going to go too mad. I'm literally just going to stick a single prop and give them plenty of bollards, and I'd like to have a nice open space. I think I'm guilty of trying to fill every single gap in the city, so where it makes sense, I think having just a big open area can be quite a welcome addition and a bit of a contrast to the busyness of the rest of the city. That said, a lot of the surfaces don't look that good when you have these really big areas. It can look just kind of unnatural and not really too realistic, so I tend to avoid it too much, but I think that's a good spot there, and I think that's something you would find in a real city. So I'm going to use Brucey Boy's Infolume and just get an update really on the city's statistics. Really what I want to have a look at is that unemployment number, because we've been seeing it's going down and down, and in fact it's down to 17%. Remember, we started the episode on 43%. Now that is a surprising number because, we still have added quite a lot of residential in here as well. Now there's plenty of jobs with signature buildings and whatnot, but that's a really surprising figure. But not as surprising as this. The death rate has reduced. Within a few minutes, it's went down to 1600. Now it's still pretty high compared to the birth rate, but collectively, that is a huge sigh of relief. A huge sigh of relief. I'd love to give you guys some insight as to why the death rate has went back down and why it jumped so much. I guess I was just in the middle of a death wave, but I'm not going to complain. I was seriously worried that was just going to keep going up and up and up and up, and basically we got a dead city again. But happy days. I feel like it is a weight taken off my shoulders, quite honestly. So what I do expect to see now is to actually see the population going up. Up until now, despite us building really high density areas, people just kept dying off, and obviously we weren't really getting much of a population increase. I suppose from a performance point of view that maybe it probably doesn't do any harm, but it's kind of weird doing all that building and really not seeing much change in terms of overall pop. The other thing I wasn't quite expecting was our medium density housing demand to really rebound, and it's massively rebound. We went from having zero, none at all in terms of demand, and we now have a full bar of it. I have had a look at demand previously, and we had hundreds of empty properties as well on the medium density, so really surprising that that's been fulfilled and then some. I'd love to give you guys some insight as to why that's the case, but honestly, I don't know. I'm going to assume that it's just the sheer amount of jobs that we've created and perhaps the effect that we've had from our landmark or our signature buildings, and maybe even adding that prison at the beginning of the episode. Perhaps that had some hidden, non-tangible benefit to the city that was perhaps holding it back. Who knows? Combination of all, I guess, and I'm not complaining, so happy days. So let's crack on with the rest of the detailing effort that we have. Again, we're going to be using those invisible paths and getting some life through here. What you might have noticed if you're a particularly keen-eyed viewer is that, can you remember the issue that we had when we were trying to bring the pedestrian paths into that junction at the beginning of the episode? Well, it was making the junction janky, and we've just used invisible paths. We've got everything hooked up and we don't have that jank. So perhaps something to keep in mind in your own city. If you are trying to bring a pedestrian road directly into a particular junction and it's causing you issues, try and swap over to the invisible ones, see if you have any joy there. But it didn't mess up our actual car traffic network or car traffic intersection, so yeah, worth keeping in mind. Now, I didn't quite believe what happened with the death rate, so I did have to go back and just double check it, make sure I was seeing things right. Make sure I was seeing things right. And I nearly made a rookie mistake here with these trees, putting them down without actually giving the things a bit of rotation. So you definitely don't want to line your trees and have the orientation exactly the same. It looks weird, and it's much better to rotate the things. So this is quite a view here. We've got a lot going on actually in terms of architectural styles. We've got big office, we've got, contemporary museum, we've got historic church, we've got some 50s looking offices alongside there as well, and then we've got plenty going on in terms of movement and life. Now, this is the first barge of the city. It's a big boy, but I'm definitely going to have plenty of these as we grow out the city. I'm going to need more, I'm going to need smaller ones, so I am at the point where I need to find somebody to go and make them for me. So a commission is in order, and I've got a few people in mind that I'm going to go and ask, but I think I need a little selection of them, various different sizes, and I just feel like I can't really start on too much of the waterway without it. I was kind of planning on trying to figure out how to do it myself, but I have 2 days in the asset editor, and I just know it's just going to take forever to get to something, get something built that's a standard that I would actually want in the city. So I think perhaps I'll just pay somebody else to do it. So we had a fair bit of jank here in this section. I think I've managed to flatten things out a little bit. I'm actually going to use just the normal path, vanilla path, and that should at least terraform the land somewhat between one road and the next. For some reason, one of the buildings was actually sunken down quite a bit beside the quay wall, so I've raised that, and that kind of sorted out a little bit. But we do have the change in elevation between, not just between the buildings, but actually between the roads as well, and it's just not playing nice. So where I needed to, I just grabbed a few trees and basically hid it. You know, what else are you going to do? Now, although this section of the city doesn't have the same wow factor as perhaps maybe some of the waterside development, this little section or section of road or section of the city, I'm not quite sure, is probably one of my favourites. I think it looks entirely reasonable to have this in a Dutch city centre, especially, you know, the modern bit with the modern buildings. I think it's pretty much spot on for me anyway. When I have a look on Google Maps, these are the kind of little areas that you see sort of dotted around the place, and I think the actual asset choices come into play here more than anything else, especially that big custom asset CBR one I think it is. It's beautiful, and hopefully we get loads more of that stuff. That said, this is probably the last of the really big tall buildings that we're going to have in the city, unless we decide to go and perhaps have another area. I'm thinking like Amsterdam south, but I'm not entirely sure whether or not it would kind of make sense whether to have that in place or not, but I guess it's one for another day. We've got plenty to get on with for the rest of the city. There's a ton of industrial stuff that I still want to do, and we have plenty of the main island to build out as well. So I've moved over to the church asset, and we are going to really just extend out the surrounding area around it. Now, all I'm going to do really is just use Piccana and use exactly the same props that are built into the actual main asset themselves. So I'm going to use the same lighting elements, I'm going to use the same planters that are there. I did obviously replace the surface that had to be done, and we kind of have something that's a little bit shinier and a little bit more modern on there as well. But I think we've got a real nice plaza, or kind of tourist area I guess that would be if it was in a real life city, and that gives us a real big landmark nestled in right in between a couple of different networks. Now, I wasn't really quite happy with having such a big space here. I think obviously we could have done it as a plaza, but really I wanted to fill the gap, and I think having something here does make a little bit more sense when we look at it. Plus it saves me doing a bit of detailing as well, which is always a bit of an added bonus, and it's just a little bit quicker. But I don't really add these things unless they make sense, and I really want it to complement the existing asset that's there and fully functional. Now here's a little asset that I kind of tend to forget that it's in the game. I really wish we had it as a net lane, but it's the UK hedge. Lovely, looks much better than the ones that are in there already. Now this asset, I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to get it into this part of the build. It's the Unité de Habitation de Marseille by Picasso. Beautiful asset, real nice addition, and I think over in this part of the build where I'm bringing the actual heights of the buildings down a wee bit and perhaps opening up the land a little bit and have it a bit less dense, I think actually it's going to make a really nice addition. But for this asset to work, for me anyway, the surrounding assets had to be of decent quality as well, and I want everything to work together and have it really working as a cohesive part of the neighbourhood, and I think we've managed to do this here. I've got the big mall in there, I ended up putting in the aquarium there as well, and then of course we've got the big signature residential building, and I think after working a little bit on the roads and the surrounding areas, I think we've got a pretty decent result there. The little touches I'm going to add in the road are some of the pavement bike paths. Haven't really, parking rather, I haven't really used that too much. Death rate down to 1,000 by the way, so if we can get that to match up roughly with the birth rate, you know, have it maybe 500 or 1,000 to 1,000, then I think I'd be a little bit more relaxed, even more so. Now round the back of these big commercial buildings, I thought, what are we going to do here? I think up against the railway, I think having a physical barrier, that physical barrier is not just going to be the fence, but I'm actually going to have some relatively dense vegetation there. I also want to have something of a mini depot area around the back. Now I think given that it's an aquarium, having some big tank of something makes sense, and, and we're going to add a few random trucks as well. Plenty of decals, we'll just make it a little bit muddy, a little bit oily, and really just make sure that it's not too sterile looking with a single surface effect. So as I say, I do want to add a reasonable bit of vegetation here, and I'm going to use a bit of a mix. We're going to use the oaks, we're going to use the custom trees, chuck in a couple of apple trees in here just to kind of lighten things up, but a nice dense line here just blocking the view for the rest of the city is pretty much what I'm looking to do. So there's the skyline. That's looking a little epic already, isn't it? The city is coming along just beautifully well. I think what I'd like to do coming up soon is to really expand out that residential stuff and really just start filling the main island. Taking a look round from the other side, I think all of those buildings make sense. Big episode actually, we've added a lot today, and obviously we've spent that time making sure that everything looks good at street level as well. I did just want to go back and just check last episode's build. Everything seems to be working still okay there. It's busy, but it is working, which is nice to see. I think this shot is actually going to make a really nice desktop shot for my PC. What do you think? I think the lighting and the clouds and everything really work together quite nicely here. Well, let's see the thing in motion and really get a feel for how things really are actually, as this is a living, breathing city, of course. Now obviously, as I mentioned earlier on, I really want to bring the water side to life, and really I've done nothing here apart from just adding the ferries today. The life that we have in the city really is all injected by the street network, the pedestrian paths, bike paths, all the little parks and everything that we've put into place, and obviously we've got a really busy Chinese supermarket down here as well. I should really think about thinking of some names for these big plazas. I think they kind of deserve them, don't they? But that's something that, I'll be honest, I haven't really done. I tend to take the road names away from the roads. I think it's a bit distracting, you know, when I'm playing the actual game itself. And of course we do have that mod that actually shows the street names on the actual streets themselves, you know, on the street signs. So perhaps putting that back on, but I don't know if, is there a way of changing them to Dutch names by default? I'm not too sure. Something I probably need to have a look at. But I think potentially it'd be a nice detail, but again, I don't know if it would just annoy me seeing the names when I'm actually building the game. So as usual in these builds, I do try and create these little vistas, you know, between the buildings. I think it's super important, and I set that out from episode 1, is I'm trying to create, you know, proper street level, interesting places, and more often than not, when we're looking down the street, I want it to terminate on an interesting building, if at all possible. Won't always work that way, but that's what I'm setting out to do. Having a look at this from the top, I think we actually need some crossings to have a safe passage between the two big buildings here that we have as part of our transit hub. And of course, I do actually need to hook up the buses. I did forget to do that. I wanted them running come the end of the episode, but I guess that's one for another day. So this episode very much has been the accumulation of several episodes, in fact, as we try and define the skyline of this city. I think given that it is a Dutch build and all the history that goes along with that, it can be quite easy to really lose the identity of the build within it. The real important stuff building it together really is the networks and the vehicles more than anything else, I'll be honest with you. I think this city centre could be in a number of European cities, and I think we've managed to get away with it. Obviously, keep looking at Rotterdam for inspiration, and that's just going to help. But the biggest thing in this episode, quite honestly, is the death rate has been solved somehow. Unemployment has almost been solved entirely in this one episode as well. Completely unexpected, but I am extremely happy about it. So today's upgrade to our city centre has really impacted the city in ways that we just didn't see coming. I think this is a great addition to the city. Hope you guys enjoyed it as well. This has been episode 16 of New Vorden. If you haven't seen the rest of them, go check out the playlist.